Hi everybody, this is Jenny and this is my disability presentation. I was inspired by Dr. Owen's assignment description to try something new, and so I explored Nearpod. I did figure out how to create a lesson, and it's designed so that students would actually log in live and we would go through this together. But since I have to pre-record my audio, I'm actually limited by Screencast-O-Matic to a 15-minute recording. If anybody can share how to lengthen that without me having to pay, that would, or use something different, that would be awesome. So I'm going to go through my presentation, and then you all can go to nearpod.com, set up a free account. Using this code, you can log in to do the collaborative elements, and you can peruse my entire presentation at your leisure if I'm going too fast, because I do need to pay attention to time. So starting off with SLD, we start by defining it under IDEA 2004, making a note that in the reauthorization in 2004, they did away with looking for the severe discrepancy between achievement and intellectual ability and instead chose to focus on that child's response to research-based intervention. And the differences between the two definitions are very similar, but there was an emphasis on psychological or emphasis on behavior in the IDEA definition, and the Illinois definition stated the neurological component of the disorder. But both of them pointed out really good things. The Illinois definition shows the distinction between information process disorders and language-related learning disabilities, and IDEA definition makes it clear SLD is not a physical impairment. The prevalence of specific learning disabilities is in 2004, 2,816,361 students between the ages of 6 to 21 were identified. That would be 47% of all special education students and 5% of school-age students. Students that are school age is where we see the most significant numbers for identification, and it drops off after age 14. Gender discrepancies are contested, some showing that there's no difference between boys and girls, others showing that boys are favored 3-to-1 to girls for specific learning disabilities. I would tend to not agree with that and think that it's probably a misdiagnosis of boys simply because they probably appear more hyperactive than girls. Learning disabilities do tend to run in families and may evidence a genetic link. The number one characteristic that defines all SLDs is unexpected underachievement. And again, important for the IEP team to try to look for the difference between academic achievement and psychoeducational assessment data, in addition to looking for data from RTI. I was encouraged in doing this assignment as the number of websites that exist out there detailing accommodations and modifications that are available, and they are targeted to each of the learning disabilities. Moving on to the second level of the EDM, I chose to research auditory processing disorder, and it's important to note that an auditory processing disorder is not a hearing disorder, but it is a disorder with how the student hears sounds and understands those sounds. Here's the quiz. Again, go to nearpod.com, use the code TXEHK, and you should be able to see feedback of which you got correct and incorrect. This was taken from an understood.com article on common myths and facts about auditory processing disorders. There are 4 areas to look for symptoms from APD. Auditory discrimination is the ability to notice and distinguish between distinct and separate sounds. For example, 70 and 17 would sound alike. Figure ground discrimination is the ability to focus on the important sounds in a noisy setting. Memory, the ability to recall what you've heard, and sequencing, the ability to understand and recall the order of sounds and words, like hearing the number 357 but writing 735. Children with APD would have at least some of the following symptoms: hard to follow spoken directions, especially multi-step, repeats what they've said or says hot and what, easily distracted, especially by background noises or loud sudden noises, trouble with reading and spelling, ability to process and interpret sound, trouble remembering details of what was read or heard, finding it hard to learn songs or nursery rhymes, struggling with oral word math problems, hard to follow conversations, and having poor musical ability. APD does overlap with many other specific learning disabilities. There's a high prevalence of ADHD with APD. Sorry about that. It does not just affect speech and learning, but all areas of learning are affected, but especially reading and spelling. So teachers who mainly communicate through spoken language will make it difficult for students with APD to be able to understand the information. There are 12 types of APD listed in the EDM. The adaptations that I chose to highlight are using visual tools like a whiteboard to support spoken lessons. As a middle school teacher, I find that writing what I want students to be doing on the board as a daily agenda is beneficial to all students. When I write my notes on the whiteboard, I can easily print them off at the beginning of the day to give to students with multiple specific learning disabilities, but definitely students with APD, so they can focus their attention on listening and comprehending what I'm teaching. Preferential seating means seating the student in the front of the room and away from doors or windows to decrease proximity to background noise and help them maintain focus. And then because APD affects language development, the student does require additional processing time and should be given extended time in a quiet room for taking all assessments. 3 types of assistive technology I want to highlight are an FM system, where the teacher wears a clip-on microphone. The student receives the speaker, which amplifies the sound, reducing background noise and poor acoustics. Sound field systems are where a microphone projects sound through mounted speakers around the classroom and eliminates problems of distance between the speaker and each listener. And then interactive metronome training was something I hadn't heard of before, but it's used to work on the brain and mind to improve critical timing skills that underlie many learning disabilities, including APD. There is a video here that you can watch at your leisure. And here is a student who you can see the difference in her symptoms before the interactive metronome training and then after the metronome training. They saw a huge difference. It is difficult to diagnose APD before the ages of 7 or 8. Getting a diagnosis requires finding a trained audiologist who can run electrophysiological tests. These tests record how the brain responds to sounds. It's important to reiterate that students with auditory processing disorder do not have a hearing impairment. I did choose to highlight hearing impairment as my second learning disability, and simply because it is so commonly confused with auditory processing disorder, I actually wanted to distinguish between the two. The definition under IDEA 2004 states that hearing impairment does mean an impairment in hearing, whether permanent or fluctuating, that adversely affects a child's educational performance, but is not included under the definition of deafness. But note here, it is possible for a student to be hearing impaired, but not have an IEP if it is shown that that impairment does not adversely affect that child's learning. Sound is measured by both its loudness and intensity and its frequency or pitch. The range of human hearing is between 0 and 130 decibels. Children are considered deaf if the hearing loss is greater than 90 decibels, and hearing loss is generally described as slight, mild, moderate, severe, or profound. Conductive hearing loss takes place in the outer or middle ear. Hearing aids, medical, and surgical treatments usually can help in many types of conductive hearing loss. Sensorineural hearing losses result from damage to the delicate sensory hair cells of the inner ear, or the nerves which supply it, and this type of hearing loss affects some frequencies more than others, making it difficult to be treated with medical and surgical treatments and hearing aids. Not to say it can't be, but it's just more challenging. Mixed hearing losses are some combination of conductive and sensorineural hearing loss, and then central hearing loss resulting from damage to the central nervous system. Early intervention between 14 months and 3 years is crucial to learn language skills necessary for reading in academic subjects. So the 3 major classifications are based on the location of the hearing loss, just like we've highlighted in the last slide. And the causes include genetic factors, maternal rubella, heredity, congenital cytomegalovirus, and prematurity. Causes of acquired hearing loss include otitis media, which is simply an ear infection, meningitis, Meniere's disease, and noise exposure. 28 million Americans are hearing impaired or deaf. 11 million of those have significant or irreversible hearing loss, and 1 million are deaf. Only 5% of people with hearing loss are under the age of 17, and 1.2% of all students with disabilities receive special education services, according to a 2004 report for the U.S. Department of Education. 90% of children served in special education programs have prelingual, meaning prior to language acquisition, hearing loss. Males are more likely than females to be deaf or hard of hearing, but no disproportionate representation of racial or ethnic groups exist, and 60 to 70% of children with hearing impairments have autosomal recessive hearing impairments. IQ is not affected in hearing impairments, the IQ would be similar to that of hearing peers. Speech and language skills are the areas of development most affected. Language skills are the areas of development most affected. Reading is the academic area that gives the greatest educational difficulty, and educational achievement is significantly below peers on average between 3 and 4 years. And 33% of all students with hearing impairments have one or more educationally significant disabilities. Social development is disrupted due to delayed language development. Services may include speech language auditory training from a specialist, amplification systems, interpreter services, favorable seating, caption videos, assistance of a note taker, instruction for the class, teacher and alternative communication methods like signing and counseling. Early, consistent, and conscious use of visible communication modes, amplification, and oral training can help reduce language delay. Students should be encouraged to use residual hearing as much as possible. So you can see here is moving to EDM level 2. I chose to highlight sensorineural hearing loss, which takes place in the inner ear, as opposed to conductive hearing losses, which are the middle and outer ear. If you have time, there's a nice video to highlight sensorineural hearing loss. And the definition of sensorineural hearing loss is a hearing loss caused by a problem in the inner ear or auditory nerve. A sensorineural loss often affects a person's ability to hear some frequency more than others. This means that sounds are distorted even with the use of a hearing aid. Sensorineural losses can range from mild to profound. Observable symptoms that you would see displayed. They do not respond consistently to sounds or to their own name. They ask for things to be repeated or often say ha. If they're delayed in developing speech or have unclear speech, they turn the volume up loud on the TV and other electronic devices. IEP teams must address communication needs as a special factor. Parents may receive hearing screenings free of charge if they suspect a hearing impairment, and all hospitals are required to give infants a screening before they leave the hospital. The adaptations I chose to highlight are peer note takers, and honestly, if teachers are just able to provide copies of notes, really you wouldn't even have to hire a peer note taker. But students with hearing loss struggle the most in language development, so providing visible notes for the student, this allows them access to the same material as their peers in a manner they can timely process. Many campuses have moved to providing captioned lecture notes, and videos should always have closed captioning enabled when they are used. Whiteboards have a CC subtitle function that can be turned on to display captions as well. Additional time for testing, both classrooms and standardized settings. Due to the delay in language development, students with hearing impairments are eligible for extended time when their testing is required. An individualized quiet setting can also eliminate background noise, and a student with any residual hearing may utilize assistive technology. You can see that the adaptations are similar between students with sensorineural hearing loss and those with auditory processing disorders, but the reasons behind the adaptations are different. Here's an IEP checklist that you can use for students that are hard of hearing. The assistive technology, again, that I chose to highlight is using an FM system. Student example, last year I did have a student with a hearing impairment and all of our teachers had to wear the FM system microphone. The only challenge we had was remembering to turn the microphone off if we ever had to step into the hall to have a private conversation with a student. And one time my coworker even forgot to take his microphone off and he wore it into the bathroom. Thankfully, the student was in the gym at this time and had taken off her receiver. And here is the collaborative piece of Nearpod, where I have asked, how do you think APD could be mistaken for, how do you think auditory processing disorder could be mistaken for hearing impairment? After viewing this presentation, write a brief response to this question that has been a common mistake in diagnosing children with disabilities, and I look forward to reading your responses. Here are my citations, which were primarily the EDM. Websites that I used in the making of this presentation were cited on individual slides, And then for the photos I used, here are those citations. I hope you've enjoyed reading this, and I look forward to seeing your presentation.